The wind doesn't whistle through the pines bordering Willow Creek anymore. It hisses, a dry, papery rasp like dead leaves skittering across frozen ground, carrying whispers that aren't words, promises that curdle the blood. Listen close. Beneath the creak of the old water tower and the distant cry of a lone whippoorwill, you can almost hear them calling the names of the children who vanished 3 autumns past. Names now echoing back on the chill air as impossible shadows detach from the deeper gloom beneath the ancient sentinel oak at the forest's edge, stepping into the sickly yellow glow of Main Street's lone surviving sodium lamp. Emily Pritchett, her golden hair dull as old straw, her eyes reflecting the light like obsidian pits. Timmy Hargrove, taller than he should be, limbs moving with the unnerving, jointless glide of something underwater. And little Sarah Jenkins, clutching a doll whose button eyes seemed to hold more life than her own hollow stare. They were back, impossibly, terrifyingly back, walking down the center line as if drawn by an invisible string, their footfalls silent on the cracked asphalt, their heads turning in perfect unison toward Sheriff Ben Miller's cruiser idling outside Dot's diner, his coffee turning to acid in his stomach, his hand frozen halfway to the radio mic, because Ben knew loss, knew the ragged hole it tore in a soul. He'd searched these woods for a year after they disappeared, following every false lead, every scrap of torn clothing, every frantic parent's plea, until the search parties dwindled and hope turned to a heavy, resigned grief that settled over Willow Creek like the perpetual swamp fog. But grief was familiar, almost warm, compared to the icy dread now clamping his heart as he saw them. Saw the utter wrongness radiating from those small, familiar forms. Their skin had the pallor of mushrooms growing under a rotten log, stretched too tight over sharp cheekbones, and their movements... God, their movements were synchronized, a macabre ballet performed without a sound. Gliding past the darkened windows of Hank's Hardware, where Old Man Rigby peered out, his face ashen, muttering the old warning his grandmother used to whisper, "The roots grow deep, boy, deeper than time, and the old willow hungers for new sap." A legend Ben had dismissed as swamp gas and superstition. Tales of a primordial consciousness woven into the gnarled heart of Blackroot Bog, an entity older than the town, older than the people who'd foolishly built on its fringes, a thing they called the Old Willow, said to crave the vibrancy, the innocence of young life to sustain its ancient, dreaming slumber, taking children not just to consume, but to change. And here was the proof walking down his street, wearing the faces of kids he'd coached in Little League, kids whose pictures still hung on the missing board gathering dust in the station, their eyes devoid of the spark that made them Emily, Timmy, Sarah, replaced by a chilling vacancy that seemed to look through him, into some dark, distant place. They stopped as one before the cruiser, turning those black mirror eyes toward Ben, and little Sarah opened her mouth, not to speak, but to emit a sound like damp reeds rubbing together, a susurration that carried no warmth, no recognition, only a flat, alien cadence that seemed to vibrate in Ben's bones, a language not meant for human tongues. Then they moved on, gliding towards Elm Street, towards the houses where lights were flicking on, doors were creaking open, drawn by the impossible miracle. The answered prayer turned nightmare. Ben fumbled the mic, his voice a hoarse croak. "Dispatch, all units! Code Echo, repeat Code Echo, Elm and Main, it's them, it's them!" But the horror truly unfolded in the days that followed, a creeping, insidious wrongness that seeped into the town's foundations. The returned children were perfect, unnervingly so. Emily flawlessly recited multiplication tables she'd struggled with. Timmy repaired complex machinery with unnerving precision. Sarah drew intricate swirling patterns that seemed to shift if you stared too long. They obeyed instantly, spoke in clipped, overly formal sentences devoid of slang or childish inflection, their smiles never reaching those depthless eyes. They ate little, mostly raw vegetables or plain rice and recoiled from open flames like startled insects. They gathered silently at dusk near the woods, standing unnaturally still, facing the dark trees as if listening. and they were cold, always cold to the touch, their skin like damp clay, their pulses slow and strangely synchronized, a single deep throb echoing through them all at precise intervals. Parents wept with joy, then wept with a different kind of tears. Joyce Pritchett clutched her daughter, whispering, "My baby, my sweet girl." But Emily remained rigid, her small body radiating a profound chill, her head resting on Joyce's shoulder without affection, those black eyes fixed on the peeling wallpaper, vacant. "She's different," Joyce confided to Ben days later, her eyes red-rimmed, haunted. "She remembers things, Ben. Tiny details, like the pattern on her old pajamas, but she doesn't feel. It's like hugging a statue carved from ice." And then the whispers started. Other children whispering of Timmy, showing them strange, smooth stones pulled from the bog, stones that hummed faintly and felt warm against the skin. Whispering of Emily, teaching them intricate, unsettling games played in near silence near the tree line, games involving complex patterns drawn in the mud, patterns that seemed to writhe if you blinked. Sarah would sit alone in the schoolyard, humming a tuneless, dissonant melody that made the birds fall silent, her fingers tracing those same swirling patterns in the dirt. And Ben watched, his dread solidifying into cold certainty as the children of Willow Creek, the real children, began to change. Bright, boisterous Tommy Evans became withdrawn, his eyes taking on a glazed look after spending an afternoon with Timmy near the old logging trail. Lively Jenny Carter started speaking in a monotone, mimicking Sarah's unnerving precision. They gathered around the returned ones like moths to a cold, dead flame, drawn by a fascination they couldn't explain, their own spark dimming, their laughter fading. Ben found Tommy one evening standing motionless in his backyard, facing the woods, rain plastering his hair to his forehead, unblinking. "Tommy, son, you okay?" Tommy turned slowly, his eyes wide and strangely reflective in the gloom. "Sheriff Ben," he intoned, his voice flat, devoid of its usual mischief. "The Roots are singing. They want us to come play. They say it's always cool and quiet under the Old Willow." Ben's blood ran colder than the rain. He doubled patrols, pleaded with parents to keep their kids away from the returned ones, but fear battled desperate hope. "She's home, Sheriff," argued Mr. Hargrove, his voice cracking. "She's safe. Maybe she's just traumatized. Give her time." Time they didn't have. The pull of the woods intensified. The returned children would stand at windows at night, their small faces pale smudges in the darkness, staring fixedly towards Blackroot Bog. Local pets went missing. Old Mrs. Gable's prize-winning tabby vanished. Rigby's coonhound was found trembling and mute near the tree line, its eyes wide with an animal terror. And then came the first disappearance. 8-year-old Liam O'Connell, last seen following Timmy Hargrove towards the old covered bridge that crossed into the deeper woods. Ben organized a frantic search, combing the fringes of the bog, the air thick with biting flies and the cloying stench of decay. They found Liam's favorite baseball cap caught on a thorny vine near a patch of unnaturally white, grasping willow saplings. The vines seemed to coil tighter around the fabric as Ben reached for it, deeper in, partially submerged in the black, sucking mud. They found footprints, Liam's small sneakers, walking steadily deeper, alongside bare footprints that looked disturbingly like Timmy's, but elongated, the toes pointed like sharp roots. Ben plunged deeper into the suffocating gloom, the hissing wind now carrying faint, high-pitched giggles that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing strangely off the gnarled trunks. The trees here were twisted into agonized shapes, draped with curtains of gray moss that felt like cobwebs against his skin. The air grew colder, thicker, tasting of iron and stagnant water. He stumbled into a clearing dominated by a colossal, grotesque willow tree. Its trunk was a fused mass of knotted, weeping wood wider than Ben's cruiser, resembling frozen agony more than bark. Ancient, broken roots breached the black water like skeletal fingers, and from its massive, drooping branches hung thousands of thin gray-green tendrils that stirred with a life of their own, whispering secrets in a language that scraped against Ben's mind. Beneath its oppressive canopy, the light died. It felt less like a tree and more like a vast, petrified heart, pulsing with a slow, subterranean rhythm that vibrated up through the mud into Ben's boots. And there, kneeling in the foul mud at the base of the monstrous trunk, was Liam. His clothes were smeared with black ooze, his eyes wide and unseeing, reflecting the dim light like the returned children's. He was scooping handfuls of the thick, tar-like mud, carefully packing it around the base of a young pale sapling that hadn't been there yesterday. Beside him stood Timmy Hargrove, but Timmy wasn't. Kneeling, he was fused, tendrils of gray root snaking up from the mud, wrapping around his legs, embedding themselves into his pallid flesh, vanishing beneath his clothes. His eyes were closed, his face serene, a small, blissful smile playing on his lips as the roots pulsed with a dim internal light. The tendrils above stirred, and a voice, impossibly vast and ancient, composed of the creak of branches, the gurgle of bog water and the dry rustle of dead leaves, resonated not in Ben's ears but inside his skull. New sap flows. Welcome, vessel, prepares. The grove grows. The words carried images, visions of the town emptying, children walking hand in hand with blank-eyed companions into the woods, sinking into the waiting mud, becoming anchors for more saplings, a spreading grove of pale, hungry willows. The old willow wasn't just taking children. It was using them as seeds, as conduits, to spread its ancient parasitic consciousness, consuming their lives, their memories, their very forms to root itself deeper into the world, turning the vibrant life of Willow Creek into fertilizer for its cold, eternal growth. The returned children weren't changelings left in place of the stolen. They were the stolen ones, hollowed out, repurposed, shells animated by the root thoughts of the entity, wearing their skins and memories like camouflage, perfect replicas designed to lure more sap, more vessels to expand the grove. Their perfection was the trap, the imitation designed to bypass parental instinct, to infiltrate and corrupt. Liam wasn't Liam anymore. He was becoming part of the system, a new node in the spreading network. Ben raised his service weapon, his hand shaking violently, aiming at the root-entwined Timmy. But the boy's eyes snapped open, black, depthless, filled with the cold awareness of the bog. And he spoke, not in Timmy's voice, but in that terrifying chorus of forest sounds. This one belongs to the roots. The cycle continues. The grove must grow. The tendrils lashed out from the great tree, not at Ben, but towards Liam, wrapping around the boy with terrifying speed, pulling him deeper into the mud near the sapling. Ben fired. The shot echoed like a thunderclap in the silent clearing. The bullet struck the mud inches from the sapling. The ancient tree groaned, a sound of profound, indifferent anger. The ground shuddered. The whispering tendrils became a furious hiss. Black shapes detached from the surrounding gloom. Emily, Sarah, other returned children, their movements swift and unnaturally fluid now, their eyes blazing with reflected malice. They glided towards him, not to attack, but to herd, to push him back, away from the grove, their small hands outstretched, cold radiating from them in waves. Ben stumbled backwards, firing wildly into the air, the shot swallowed by the oppressive silence of the bog. He broke into a panicked run, branches whipping at his face, the hissing wind now sounding like mocking laughter. He burst from the tree line, gasping into the fading light of evening, the town lights of Willow Creek twinkling deceptively peaceful in the distance. Behind him, the woods felt denser, darker, hungrier. He reached his cruiser, radioing frantically. "It's the Willow! Blackroot Bog! The children! They're not children! They're seeds! It's turning them all!" But as he looked back toward the woods, he saw them, Small figures emerging onto lawns all over town. The returned children, standing perfectly still, facing the houses where the real children lived. They weren't alone. Standing beside Emily Pritchett was a smaller figure, unnaturally pale, moving with that same fluid glide. Liam O'Connell, his eyes already darkening pools, a smear of black mud on his cheek. He raised a small hand, pointing towards Billy Carter's brightly lit bedroom window. The cycle had already begun anew. The roots were reaching out, tendrils of imitation and dread snaking into the heart of Willow Creek. Promising perfect children returned, whispering lies of safety, all while the ancient, ravenous consciousness beneath the bog prepared its grove for an endless, terrible harvest. The fear wasn't just that your child was gone. It was that something wearing their face, speaking with their voice, remembering their secrets, was walking back into your home, colder than the grave, its only purpose to lead your next child into the waiting, suffocating embrace of the mud. Ben slumped against the steering wheel, the town lights blurring through tears of horror and helplessness. The hiss of the woods now a constant, dreadful chorus in his mind, whispering that the Old Willow's roots grew deep, deeper than hope, deeper than grief. And they were growing still, reaching for the warm, beating hearts of every child still laughing under. The fragile illusion of safety. The horror wasn't over. It had just taken root, and the harvest of innocence was only just beginning.